Jimmy Carter spent his life looking like the calmest man in the room. He smiled slowly and spoke softly. He carried himself like someone who could wait out any storm, and most people remember him as gentle and steady. But there is a correction that changes the whole picture. If you don't know this part of the story, you end up believing the Carter family was always calm. They weren't. The reward for looking closer is that you find the real engine behind that famous restraint. Jimmy Carter's family story includes a flash of violence so sharp it feels unreal. His great-grandfather, Little Barry Walker Carter, did not die quietly in bed. In 1903, at the age of 71, his life ended at a carnival in Dawson, Georgia. A carnival is supposed to be a place of noise, laughter, and a break from hard work. But in rural, southern gatherings of that time, old grudges could sit right under the surface. Barry Carter got into a heated altercation that day. Some records say it was a dispute over a carnival game. Others say it was a family disagreement. Either way, a small moment blew up, pride took over, and someone made a choice that couldn't be taken back. Barry was stabbed to death in the middle of a public gathering where families had gone to enjoy an evening. This tragedy landed like a punch because it happened during normal life, showing everyone just how fragile safety can be. When a tragedy hits a family that hard, it doesn't just vanish. It changes the tone of everything and forces people to grow up too fast. This death became a hinge for the whole family line. According to the records, it left Jimmy's father, James Earl Carter Sr., as the family patriarch at a very young age. Being the patriarch in a family like this meant one thing: you were the person who had to hold everything together and protect the family name. This kind of sudden shift can harden a family's habits. It makes people suspicious of chaos and teaches them to value steadiness above all else. It teaches children that losing control has permanent consequences. This is likely where Jimmy Carter's famous public image began. He learned how to keep his temper in check and lead with discipline. When a family has a violent rupture in its past, they often develop a quiet discipline as a defense. Jimmy Carter's calm wasn't just a personality trait. It was a survival skill sharpened over generations. People love to joke that Jimmy Carter was just a peanut farmer, as if it's a cute, small-town slogan. But if you believe that, you miss what the peanuts really meant. He didn't pick farming as a hobby. He stood at the end of a 7-generation march across Georgia soil. That farm wasn't a quirky backdrop. It was the final dot on a map that started in the 1750s. The real story isn't one man in overalls, but a family that kept moving, planting, and adapting long enough to reach the White House. The Carter farming story began in Georgia in the 1750s and ran through a long chain of seasons. Kindred Carter settled along Little Germany Creek around the 1780s. A creek was a lifeline back then, providing water for people and animals. He needed to plant his life somewhere it would last, and that choice gave the family a starting point on the Georgia map. From there, the family began a slow pull toward the southeast. James Carter moved the family to Whites Creek in 1815 and then to Talbot County in 1835. Moving a farm isn't easy. You have to clear new land and learn to trust new soil. He died on his son Wiley's plantation, showing that the family wasn't just drifting, they were growing into new places. Wiley Carter eventually established a massive 2,400-acre plantation growing cotton. This wasn't a little farm. It was land on a scale that brought power and security to the family. By 1860, Little Barry Walker Carter was farming in the Sumter County area. The family's presence there wasn't a late arrival, it had been building for decades. His son, William A. Carter, eventually shifted the family's center to Plains. This move was like planting a flag. Then, Jimmy's father, James Earl Carter expanded the operations and moved the family from cotton to diversified crops, including peanuts, by the 1920s. Switching from cotton to peanuts was a major strategy shift. It meant the family was no longer betting everything on one harvest. James Earl chose flexibility to ensure the family could survive in a changing world. When Jimmy later worked that farm, he was continuing a legacy shaped by centuries of choices. He operated a farm on land adjacent to the soil his ancestors had held for over 100 years. Jimmy Carter's public image as a grounded, plain-spoken man mirrored this family pattern. For 7 generations, the Carters didn't chase glamour. They chased workable land and stayed serious about survival. The peanut farm in Plains was the end of a long, stubborn chain of choices that began in the 1700s. It represented a family that knew leadership could be forced on you without warning, and that chaos was expensive. In the 1950s, Jimmy Carter faced a choice in his own community that would cost him dearly. Inside Plains Baptist Church, the members held a vote on a resolution to bar black people and racial agitators from membership. The measure passed by a landslide with over 100 members voting for exclusion. Fewer than 10 people voted no, and most of those were Carters. You might think this kind of dissent was common, but it wasn't. If you miss this story, you might think the Carters' later views were just about politics. The truth is that it started here, in a place where church was the center of belonging and where you were judged by who you stood beside. But his time in the Navy, under President Truman's desegregation orders, changed him. He came to see integration as a Christian moral imperative. When the church vote came, it wasn't just a rumor or a private chat, it was a formal decision. The term racial agitator was a label used to silence anyone who pushed for change. By voting no, Carter wasn't just disagreeing with a policy, he was disagreeing with his neighbor's fear and control. Because the church was small, votes weren't really anonymous. Everyone knew who the few dissenters were. This stance strained relations in the town. Fellowship in a small church is built on shared songs and shared memory, and when you break that, the atmosphere gets tense. This moment foreshadowed the family's later split to form the Maranatha Baptist Church. Carter was swimming against the wave, taking an unpopular stand long before he had the protection of national fame. It was a family stance, with his immediate family members standing with him against a room of 100 people. To understand how the Carters became a local force, you have to look at Jimmy's father, known to everyone as Mr. Earl. He didn't rise because someone handed him a clean path. He rose because he treated rural Georgia like a puzzle. He was a farmer who worked hundreds of acres growing cotton, peanuts, corn, and sugarcane. But he was also a businessman who opened a grocery store and built a seed and fertilizer hub called Carter's Warehouse. Mr. Earl was a man of practical power. He served on the school board and the Rural Electrification Administration Board, which brought light to homes that had only known darkness. He didn't just accept the hard red clay of the Georgia fields. He introduced crop rotation and soil conservation to boost his yields. He used precise inventory to make sure his business thrived even when profit margins were low. This discipline allowed him to build wealth that was unusual for the area. In a rural county, that kind of success makes you a leader people depend on. By 1952, he was elected to the Georgia House of Representatives. He advocated for education and electricity while holding conservative views on other government programs, making him a leader who could push for progress without trying to remake the whole world. Mr. Earl died young, at only 58 from pancreatic cancer. His death came just a year after his election, cutting his political career short and forcing his family to adjust suddenly. He left behind a model of leadership: work the land, build a business, and step into public service to manage the things that make a community stronger. In the Carter household, public life wasn't something distant. It was something you managed and influenced. Jimmy Carter took that foundation and added a deep personal commitment to faith. For him, faith wasn't just a label, it was an action. He famously said that faith is not just a noun, but also a verb. He started teaching Sunday school at age 18, long before anyone called him president. Even during his years in the White House, he kept returning to that weekly class. A president is pulled by global crises, yet he still treated a Bible class as a duty. Over his life, he taught more than 2,000 lessons at Maranatha Baptist Church. He saw this as direct obedience to the call to help others learn and grow. While the Oval Office can inflate a person's ego, Carter felt that a church classroom could shrink a person back to human size. He even said that teaching felt more fulfilling than the heavy burdens of the presidency. After he left office, he resumed teaching nearly every Sunday. Global crowds eventually began traveling to Plains just to hear him teach about kindness, equality, and servant leadership. He didn't act like this was beneath him. He acted like it was the center of his life. He used the Sunday class to keep himself humble and resist the trap of self-importance that often catches former leaders. When Carter ran for president in 1976, he used the peanut farmer image as a brilliant strategy. He wanted voters to see a man with dirt under his nails, the opposite of the Washington elites people were tired of. He highlighted the fact that he grew up on a farm without electricity or plumbing, and he told stories of boiling peanuts at age 5. It was an image that felt authentic because it was rooted in real labor. However, that story was only part of the truth. While he emphasized his humble chores, his family had been powerful Georgia landowners for nearly 2 centuries. By 1851, the family owned 2,400 acres and ran expansive operations with sharecroppers. The Carters were among the few white landowning families in their area, which gave them significant status and power. Jimmy Carter chose to lead with the manual labor side of his history, while downplaying the long legacy of land ownership and influence. This wasn't a lie, but it was careful storytelling. He turned a specific crop, peanuts, into a symbol of humility and connection. It allowed him to claim his southern roots while avoiding the heavier history of land and power. He built a public identity out of the pieces of his ancestry that helped him most in that moment. After the White House, most famous people moved to elite circles in big cities, but Carter did the opposite. He went back to Plains, a town of about 600 people. He returned to reclaim his peanut farm, which had been mismanaged while he was away. He chose the hard work of fixing a business and staying near his family over a life of luxury elsewhere. Plains represented continuity for him. His ancestors had settled nearby in the early 1800s, and 7 generations had worked that same soil. For Carter, the ground was more than property. It was his identity. He stayed tied to that base even as he traveled the world for humanitarian work. He lived simply in Plains until his death at age 100. By staying, he boosted local tourism and used his visibility to keep the town alive. He rejected elite moves and stayed grounded in the rural South. In Plains, he wasn't just a title. He was a neighbor who showed up to teach and help build homes for others. His life stayed whole because he never let the world pull him away from the place where his story began.